top focus right now continues to be the India-Canada ties, which have been on a downward spiral for quite some time now. Last year, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau accused India of violating Canada's sovereignty and killing a Khalistani terrorist, Hardeep Nijjar. These accusations were made public in Canada's House of Commons. India rejected the charges leveled by Trudeau and termed them, quote-unquote, absurd and motivated. In a strongly worded statement, the Ministry of External Affairs of India emphasized that such unsubstantiated allegations seek to shift the focus from Khalistani terrorism, separatism and extremism, who have been provided shelter in Canada, but instead continue to threaten India's sovereignty and territorial integrity. A year on, India and Canada's diplomatic fallout has reached new lows, with the Trudeau administration doubling down on its charges. In fact, the RCMP, that is Canada's National Police Service, went a step further, accusing our High Commissioner as well as other Indian officials of backing criminal elements in Canada. Trudeau and the RCMP have accused our High Commissioner of working with the Lawrence Bishnoi gang to target Canadians who are anti-Modi and anti-India. The Indian government has issued once again a stern rebuttal, reminding Canada that it has failed to submit any proof to back its charges despite repeated questions. Furthermore, India has recalled its envoys from Ottawa and expelled 6 Canadian diplomats from New Delhi. This move was met with calls for the imposition of sanctions on Indian diplomats in Canada. Jagmeet Singh, the leader of the NDP and a former ally of Justin Trudeau, was particularly vocal in making this demand. He is a known Khalistani sympathizer, and he went on to state that Canada needs to work with its allies such as the United States of America to put pressure on India. Meanwhile, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police backtracked on its charges. They said that there's no imminent threat to the public of Canada from the alleged activities of Indian officials. This has come just as Justin Trudeau testified at the public inquiry into foreign interference, admitting that Canada has not shared any solid evidence with India so far, but all their accusations are simply based on intelligence. Canada presented India no evidence whatsoever to support very serious allegations that it has chosen to make against India and its diplomats. The Ministry of External Affairs has responded that Trudeau's testimony confirms India's consistent stance and the responsibility for the damage that this cavalier behavior has caused to India-Canada relations lies with Justin Trudeau alone. But that's not all. The MEA has revealed that there are 26 extradition requests for those wanted on terror charges that are pending with Canada. Canada continues to give shelter to people who, as per Indian intelligence, could be a cause of trouble. These requests have been pending for the last decade. India has also revealed that security information on gangs, including the Lawrence Bishnoi gang, was disclosed to Canada, but no action was taken by Canadian authorities, and none perhaps will be taken in the near future, because Canada under Justin Trudeau continues to put forward an entirely different narrative to the world. Joining me on the broadcast is Kevin Vuong. He's a Canadian Member of Parliament, an independent Member of Parliament. Kevin Vuong, thank you so much for joining us on NewsX.
Thank you for having me.
My first question to you, do you think that the current Canadian government under Justin Trudeau has soured India-Canada relations for domestic political gains?
I think that's definitely a good question. I think we have to look at the facts. The fact is, when the Prime Minister first made the accusation that the Indian government had some role, he cited that there was alleged credible intelligence. But at the same time, he has also said when it comes to the alleged intelligence of Chinese foreign interference, intelligence is not evidence. And so I think it's important to see that there are similar, apparently 2 different approaches when it comes to dealing with alleged foreign interference in Canada. When it comes to something that the Prime Minister believes may come from India, apparently that is something that is a priority for him, but when he's asked for the evidence, isn't able to actually show it. And so it is, I think, a very valid question to ask, why did the Prime Minister, and it was just revealed this morning actually in Canada's Globe and Mail newspaper, that a week before Thanksgiving, the Prime Minister's National Security Intelligence Advisor went to the Washington Post. I thought intelligence was so secret, so classified that he couldn't speak to it, and yet he could send his National Security Intelligence Advisor to go to a foreign media outlet, by the way, to share this alleged intelligence. And so all of these inconsistencies lead us to ask questions about, why is he doing this? Where's the evidence? Why isn't he bringing it forward? And is this for domestic politics?
Okay, Mr. Vuong, has the opposition in Canada then pulled up Justin Trudeau and his government for not responding to extradition requests raised by India or not providing intelligence as India continues to now maintain its stance?
So, from my perspective, what I can tell you is I believe that democracies need to stand together, whether it's Canada, India, or any others. And so as democracies, we're governed by rule of law, and that means that if there are extradition requests, if there are criminals in our different countries that other democracies want to bring to justice, I think we have a duty as countries governed by rule of law to work together to do exactly that. And I think it again begs the question of, why were extradition requests denied? And was that motivation for those denials politically driven or for something else?
Okay, so but really, from your perspective then, why is Justin Trudeau's government protecting anti-India separatists and secessionists who routinely burn the Indian flag? They burn the effigies of India's political leadership.
I have no idea, because when I meet with Hindu Canadians, they tell me how concerned they are about the attacks and vandalisms on their temples. And in Canada, we respect and protect one's right to worship whoever they want. And so why aren't we protecting Hindu Canadians when it's very clear about who is committing those attacks, who are persecuting Hindu Canadians on Canadian soil? The Canadian government has a duty to protect Hindu Canadians as they do need to protect all Canadians. And so again, when we look at all of the things that the Trudeau government does, but also chooses not to do, it brings us back to the question of, what is their motivation for their inaction? Why are they choosing to allow these proudly Khalistani elements attack Hindu Canadians, attack their temples, and to harass Canadians? It's absolutely shameful, and they're failing in their duty to protect Canadians.
Ms. Vuong, you also spoke about the rule of law and how democracies come together in today's world underscored by shared common values and principles. But from an objective point of view, how would Canada react if India perhaps allowed Quebec secessionists to carry out referendums in New Delhi and put up posters calling for the assassination of Justin Trudeau and Canadian envoys? What would be Canada's reaction?
So that is a parallel example that I've thought a lot about. Historically, Canada used to have in the province of Quebec, FLQ, which actually committed terrorist acts in the hopes of achieving separatism, for Quebec to separate from Canada. And I think that is a very apt parallel comparison between what the Khalistanis claim to want to do for Punjab and to be able to separate that. And I think it's important for Canadians to know, or perhaps remember, that Khalistanis are also behind the most horrific terror attack on Canadians, the bombing of the Air India flight. And
yes.
So this is something that Canada needs to deal with, not only because it is vitally important to a fellow democracy like India, but also because there are groups who are persecuting, attacking Canadians on Canadian soil, the same group that has committed a terror attack that has killed Canadians. And this is something that needs to be a priority for Justin Trudeau's government, but hasn't been. And we have to ask why.
Mr. Vuong, at the same time, now I'm glad that you brought up the Air India bombing episode as well, because it seems as though that has been completely whitewashed from the history of Canada. Why do you think that is? How is it that many Canadians, if today asked about the worst terror attack until 9/11 that took place in the world, would perhaps not be able to really point out that it was the Air India bombing of 1985, in which hundreds of Canadian lives were lost?
Yeah, and I think unfortunately whitewash is very accurate, because it took decades for the families of the victims to get even some measure of justice. And even then, I think a real injustice was done for the victims and their families. And to ensure that things like that never happen again, we have to look comprehensively at all such groups, never mind the one that was behind that actual attack. So as Canada faces real issues of foreign interference from the Chinese Communist Party, I think we also need to look at Khalistanis, the Islamic regime in Iran, and any others who hate democracies, who hate who we are, and hate the very societies that we have built that are governed by rule of law.
Ms. Vuong, would you then somewhere accept that there is perhaps a Khalistani terror threat which was ignored in the 1980s, which led to this loss of Canadian lives?
Yeah, I think there are real consequences when leaders choose to take a blind eye to ignore real threats to Canadians for their own selfish gain, for something that might help them politically, or perhaps frankly, it's just easier. Because standing up to bullies, standing up to those who attack, harass, and intimidate is not easy. But Canadians expect their leaders to lead and do the hard work. If you're going to sit in the Prime Minister's chair, you need to do the hard work of confronting those who do not share our values, who put Canadians in danger and have killed Canadians, as we saw, sadly, with the Air India bombing by Khalistanis.
So is there, Mr. Vuong, any discontent amongst the people of Canada against the Justin Trudeau government for allowing, as you've also pointed out, Khalistani goons, that's what one can call them at this point in time, to carry out violent protests that we've seen on the streets, where we've really seen them burning the Indian flag and burning effigies and vandalizing Hindu temples? Are Canadians asking why criminals are being allowed to enter Canada, become Canadian citizens, and then get international protection and impunity for their acts?
I think, unfortunately, if you ask Canadians, one of the things that is top of mind for them after affordability, housing, and the cost of groceries is safety. That's definitely the case here in my city of Toronto. People are increasingly feeling unsafe. Not only, sadly, do we see Indian flags being burnt, ripped up, and frankly desecrated, we've also seen Canadian flags. We've also seen Israeli flags, right? What unites the three of us? We are all democracies. So there is a real attack on democracies that is happening not only around the world, but also right here in Canada, right here in Toronto. And what we expect from our leaders. I mean, Canada is a G7 country. We're a founding member of NATO. You can't tell me that with all of the resources and authority that comes with leading a G7 nation, you can't address issues of our border integrity, where people who are criminally inadmissible are somehow making them way into Canada, where we have people attacking Canadians, persecuting them for their religion and their faith, and we can't do anything. No, that it's not because we can't, it's because there's an intentional choice that is being made, and we have to ask why. Why are leaders choosing to turn a blind eye to it? and what is their motivation for that?
Mr. Vuong, that brings me back to a question that I've asked earlier. You're also saying that we have to ask why, but in your perspective and understanding, like I said, is there then growing political discontent against Justin Trudeau? Because we have to also put the developments in a political context for the larger viewership to understand. Next year, October roughly, is when Canada will be having its general elections. So is this then a method employed by Justin Trudeau to simply shift focus from some of the domestic aspects that you pointed out, that the people in Canada are more worried about safety, they're worried about housing, they're worried about employment, and he's trying to shift that focus away from what's happening, his domestic failures, and making it out about India?
So Canadians are also worried about foreign interference, especially from the Chinese Communist Party. And I don't think it was a coincidence that we got a surprise Thanksgiving briefing from the RCMP a day before the Prime Minister's office was set to take the stand and to testify at the Hague Commission on Foreign Interference. And it was only 2 days before the Prime Minister himself took the stand. And instead of speaking about why his office and himself and the Liberal Party has turned a blind eye to Chinese foreign interference, the convenient Thanksgiving, one of the most, I think, important family events in the country. So it is not normal for that to happen. But now it provided the Prime Minister conveniently with the ability to be able to speak not of Chinese foreign interference, but now to bring up India. And it's no secret for anyone within politics that there are about 9 seats in British Columbia where the Sikh community plays an important role. And this isn't to say that the Sikh community is entirely supportive of the extremist Khalistani movement. They are not a monolith just like any other community. But we know that, unfortunately, having spoken to members of the Sikh community, but also and the Hindu Canadian community, that those extremist elements are not afraid to use intimidation, harassment to get their way. And so that could also mean intimidating people to vote a particular way. That's also why I think we've seen the NDP leader take to the microphone any chance he gets to be able to, frankly, crap on a fellow democracy because it helps him domestically, because those are seats that currently his MPs occupy. And he's wants to make sure he retains them. And I think that is disgraceful. And I hope that the tit for tat we've been seeing between our two democracies, I hope that cools down, because there are long-standing historical ties between Canada and India. There are so many Canadians of Indian heritage, and we have to remember that, we have to protect that, and we need to continue to ensure that we grow that in spite of our government.
Mr. Vuong, I also want to understand from you, from a political point of view, how crucial is a Jagmeet Singh who's recently pulled support from the Justin Trudeau government, but how crucial is then appeasing Jagmeet Singh for a Justin Trudeau?
So up until this summer, the Liberal Party under Justin Trudeau and the NDP, the Socialist Party under Jagmeet Singh, had something called a confidence and supply agreement that allowed them to essentially govern with a majority within the House of Commons of Canada. And so Jagmeet Singh made a big performance about allegedly ripping up that agreement this summer. But the reality is, I think, when it comes to Jagmeet Singh and the NDP, they will continue to work together. However, the government can fall at any moment. And so the Liberals being able to retain NDP support or support from any other party to ensure that they have a majority in the House is important. So is supporting something that the NDP leader would be favorable to part of the calculation for Justin Trudeau and his inner circle? Perhaps. But it just so happens that I think in this case, they are quite aligned in wanting to vie for those same seats where potentially the extremist Khalistani movement can have a say in determining who wins or loses.
Right. At the same time, Mr. Vuong, I also want to understand from you, firstly, where do you think Justin Trudeau will leave India-Canada ties if he were to perhaps not come back October next year? Where do you think he's going to leave our ties in the next 1 year?
Unfortunately, I think it's a fact that Canada and India relations have never been worse, at least not in my lifetime. And that will be one of the legacies for Justin Trudeau, whether he chooses to leave sometime soon, as at least 24 members of his caucus want him to, or if he loses in an election sometime next year, whenever that will be, whether it's in the fall or earlier. The fact is, and the history will show, that two ties between Canada and India, two democracies with long-standing history and people-to-people relations, is worse off now, and probably worse it's ever been for decades. And that will be a legacy of Justin Trudeau. And it will be the job of the next Prime Minister to repair that. Because at a time where there's rising authoritarianism, where there's increasing attacks on democracies around the world, we need to stand together and we need to stand united. We can't be divided when it comes to fighting authoritarianism and standing up for rule of law.
Mr. Vuong, I also want to understand from you one other aspect. Do you feel that it's fair for America and Canada to expect that the rules will be different when it comes to India versus what the United States of America does to protect its own people and to protect its own interest? We can name the number of times the USA has invaded territories across the world, sometimes without the knowledge of those countries and its leadership, that they will be facing some sort of an attack. But at the same time, also for then Canada and America, without evidence, to come out, make serious accusations against India, despite India being the one warning both of these nations that you are harboring snakes in your backyard and one day they will bite you. But do you feel that somewhere there is a classic hypocrisy that is on display in the way India has been treated in this entire scenario?
I think every country and every government has a responsibility to protect its people. I think that's where I understand the Indian government to be coming from. And that's where I think the Canadian government, especially when it comes to protecting Hindu Canadians, protecting, frankly, Jewish Canadians, and Iranian Canadians as three communities that come to mind, is where Justin Trudeau's government has been failing. Even the Chinese diaspora for decades has been calling for a stop to the interference that we've been seeing from the Chinese Communist Party. Governments have a duty to protect our people. And so I think first and foremost, that's what I think a lot about. And I go back to the question of why is the Trudeau government turning a blind eye to actions from Khalistani extremists, but also Chinese and Islamic regime in Iran agents, right? These are all foreign groups committing attacks, harassment, intimidation on Canadian people, on Canadian soil, and that must stop.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.